they seemed to bleed into it. It was a place where concrete walls grew so tightly together that the sky became a luxury, a narrow strip of gray trapped between towering, rain-stained apartment blocks. Down on the pavement, life was a relentless, breathless scramble. If you didn't move, you got trampled. If you didn't work, you didn't eat. The air was a thick, humid soup laced with the sharp aroma of roasting duck, the pungent kick of fermented tofu, and the metallic tang of old harbor water. It was a neighborhood built on the backs of people who had nothing but their own sweat to sell, a community of survivors who knew exactly how much a bowl of rice cost and how much pain a human body could endure before it broke. To understand Kowloon in those days was to understand the weight of an honest day's labor. Long before the sun even thought about cutting through the heavy coastal fog, the fishmongers were already up, their hands red and raw from burying fish in blocks of jagged ice. By mid-morning, the construction laborers were hauling heavy bamboo scaffolding up 20 flights of stairs, their muscles screaming, their shirts soaked through with a mixture of rain and sweat. Street vendors stood behind sputtering oil vats for 12, 14 hours at a time, their faces glistening under the harsh glare of bare light bulbs, all for a handful of coins to keep a roof over their children's heads. These were proud people, resilient people. They knew how to handle the cruelties of poverty, the biting winter winds, and the suffocating summer heat. But there was one burden they couldn't seem to shake, a shadow that hung lower and heavier than any monsoon cloud. His name was Chen Wei. At 28 years old, Chen Wei didn't just walk through the district, he possessed it. He hadn't been chosen by the community, nor did he offer them anything in return for their compliance. His authority wasn't built on respect, leadership, or kindness. It was carved out of pure, unadulterated intimidation. If fear had a physical form, it would have mirrored his exact build. Broad shoulders that rarely relaxed, a jawline permanently set in a sneer, and eyes that scanned every face in the crowd, actively looking for a reason to take offense. To Chen Wei, the crowded market alleys weren't a place of business. They were his personal testing grounds, a stage where everyone else was merely an extra in his grand display of dominance. He was, by all objective accounts, a terrifyingly skilled karate practitioner. No one who watched him train could deny the explosive power in his hips or the blinding speed of his straight punches. He had the trophies to prove it too. He had traveled to regional tournaments, smashed through thick stacks of pine boards with his bare knuckles, and left a trail of bruised, broken challengers in his but martial arts mastery is a dangerous mirror. For some, it reflects a path toward inner peace and self-control. For Chen Wei, it became a magnifying glass for his worst impulses. Somewhere along the line, the thrill of winning twisted into a dark addiction to making others feel small. The stronger his knuckles grew, the more fragile his ego became. He stopped viewing karate as a discipline and began using it as a weapon of psychological warfare. A victory wasn't satisfying to him unless it was accompanied by the sound of an opponent groveling or the sight of a shopkeeper trembling as they handed over protection money disguised as a friendly tax. Eventually, the people of Kowloon stopped thinking of him as a man. He became an unpredictable natural disaster, a sudden storm that could rip through a quiet afternoon without warning. When Chen Wei walked down a street, the atmosphere changed instantly. The loud, boisterous bargaining between vendors and customers would suddenly drop to a tense whisper. The laughter of children playing in the alleyways would vanish as mothers quickly pulled them behind wooden counters. It wasn't because he was a king, it was because he was a tyrant who took immense pleasure in the sight of weakness. For him, the ultimate validation of his own existence was seeing another human being lower their gaze in his presence. On this particular evening in July, the heat was suffocating. A sudden, violent afternoon downpour had left the asphalt slick and reflective, turning the neon signs of the market into long, smeared streaks of crimson and emerald across the wet ground. The humidity rose from the gutters in thick, visible plumes of steam, carrying the scent of wet garbage and lemongrass. Despite the oppressive air, the market was bursting at the seams. It was the peak hour, the time when shift workers spilled out of the nearby textile factories and crowded around the open-air food stalls, desperate for a cheap meal and a cold drink before heading home to their cramped apartments. This was Chen Wei's favorite hour of the day. The sheer density of the crowd meant he had a guaranteed audience. What good was being a lion if there were no sheep around to watch you roar? He emerged from a side alley, flanked by two of his top students. His chest was thrust forward, his jaw tilted upward as if he were looking over the heads of everyone in the district. His hands were already wrapped tight in thick, white fighting tape, a deliberate theatrical choice designed to remind every passerby that his fists were always ready for war. The two students walked half a step behind him, mimicking his posture, their faces masks of unearned arrogance. They looked at Chen Wei not just as a teacher, but as proof that cruelty was the ultimate expression of strength. They hadn't lived long enough to understand that real strength doesn't need to shout, nor does it need an audience to feel secure. They only knew the intoxicating feeling of watching people scatter when they walked by, and scatter they did. As the trio moved through the narrow rows of vegetable crates and fish buckets, the crowd parted. It wasn't a dramatic, panicked stampede, but rather a subtle, well-rehearsed shifting of bodies. A basket of oranges was pulled back an inch. A fishmonger suddenly found an urgent reason to look down at his chopping board. A young mother stepped into the shadow of a fabric stall, shielding her toddler with her body. Chen Wei tracked every single one of these micro-movements. He felt the shift in the air pressure, the collective holding of breath that accompanied his footsteps. A slow, toxic smile spread across his face, his eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a man who believed he held the strings to the entire neighborhood. He was drunk on his own reputation, completely unaware that the higher an arrogant man climbs on a mountain of fear, the harder the wind blows when he finally reaches the edge. Fate, however, was already setting the clock, waiting just around the dark corner of the next fish stall. Section 2. A Collision of Worlds. At the far end of the bustling market, completely detached from the tense energy rippling through the crowd, stood Madame Li. She was a fixture of the neighborhood, the kind of person who seemed to have been carved out of the very foundation of Kowloon itself. She was small, her frame slightly bent by the decades she had spent carrying heavy laundry baskets and chasing grandchildren up narrow stairwells. Her hair was a beautiful, unbroken silver, pulled back into a neat, tight bun at the nape of her neck. Yet, despite the physical toll that time and labor had taken on her spine, there was a quiet dignity in the way she carried herself. Her eyes, surrounded by deep-set laugh lines, were clear and sharp. Life had taken much from her, but it had never managed to steal her grace. On this humid evening, she was completing her daily routine. In her worn hands, she carried a faded canvas tote bag containing a modest assortment of fresh bok choy, a small parcel of dried shrimp wrapped in brown butcher paper, and a scratched, dented metal thermos. That thermos was practically an extension of her arm. She had owned it for nearly 15 years, using it to carry hot ginger tea to comfort her aching joints during the long winters. Having secured the last ingredients for her family's dinner, she adjusted the strap of her bag and began the slow, familiar walk back toward her apartment block. At that exact, unforgiving fraction of a second, Chen Wei rounded the corner of the fish market. He was deep in conversation with his students, gesturing wildly with his taped hands, his eyes scanned over the crowd rather than the path directly in front of him. Neither of them saw the other until it was too late. Their shoulders collided. In a sprawling city of millions, this was the most ordinary kind of accident, the sort of minor friction that occurred thousands of times a day in the packed corridors of Hong Kong. In any normal circumstance, between two decent human beings, it would have been resolved in a heartbeat. A polite nod, a muttered apology, a brief moment of shared understanding, and life would move on. But Chen Wei was not a normal human being, and this was not a normal circumstance. The impact, though accidental, was heavy enough to throw the frail old woman completely off balance. Madame Li stumbled backward, her worn sandals skidding on the wet, slick pavement. Her grip failed, and the canvas bag slipped from her fingers. Instantly, her world scattered across the ground. The bok choy rolled into a puddle of murky water. The brown paper tore open, spilling dried shrimp across the damp concrete, and the heavy metal thermos fell with a loud, clattering clang, rolling several feet away toward the gutter. Madame Li swayed, nearly collapsing onto the hard asphalt herself, her hands instinctively reaching out for a support structure that wasn't there. A young fruit vendor working a nearby stall saw her stumble. Out of pure human instinct, he leaped over his wooden crate, his hands outstretched to catch the elderly woman before she hit the ground. But mid-stride, His eyes darted from Madame Li to the man she had collided with. The moment he recognized the broad shoulders and the wrapped knuckles of Chen Wei, the vendor froze as if he had run into a brick wall. The color drained from his face. He slowly lowered his hands, took a step backward, and looked down at his own shoes. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the immediate radius of the market. The ambient noise of the crowd, the sizzling of oil, the shouting of prices, the laughter, seemed to dry up instantly, replaced by a tense, collective holding of breath. Everyone knew what Chen Wei was capable of when his path was crossed. Madame Li, shaking off the shock of the impact, slowly regained her footing. She didn't shout, nor did she cower. Instead, she looked up at the towering figure of the martial artist, her expression remarkably calm. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice polite, respectful, and entirely devoid of malice. It was the gentle, dignified response of an elder who recognized an accident for what it was. Chen Wei stood perfectly still. He looked down at the old woman standing before him. Then, his eyes slowly drifted to the scattered vegetables on the wet ground, the spilled shrimp, and the rolling thermos. Finally, he turned his head, scanning the circle of spectators who had stopped in their tracks to watch the scene unfold. A dark, ugly realization sparked in his chest. An audience. He had a completely captive audience. Dozens of eyes were locked onto him, waiting to see how the king of the district would react to being bumped by a frail grandmother. A slow, cruel smile began to curl the corner of Chen Wei's mouth. Then, he let out a sharp, mocking laugh. It wasn't the sound of genuine amusement, it was a theatrical, performative laugh designed to weaponize the old woman's misfortune for his own amusement. "Old woman," Chen Wei barked, his voice booming over the quiet market stalls so that even those at the back could hear him clearly. "You need to learn how to look where you are walking. The streets are for people who actually have somewhere to go, not for blind grandmothers dragging their feet." Around the circle, several onlookers immediately lowered their eyes. A few shopkeepers turned back to their counters, suddenly pretending to be incredibly busy sorting inventory. No one wanted to meet Chen Wei's gaze. No one wanted to become the next target of his explosive temper. But Madame Li did not look down. She stood her ground, her silver hair catching the flickering light of a nearby neon sign. She looked directly into Chen Wei's angry eyes, her voice remaining perfectly steady. "You walked into me," she said quietly. The words weren't delivered with aggression or anger. They were spoken with the absolute, unshakable weight of simple truth. The mocking smile instantly vanished from Chen Wei's face, replaced by a dark, dangerous scowl. To an arrogant man whose entire identity is built on a fragile illusion of absolute dominance, nothing is more terrifying or more insulting than the unvarnished truth, especially when it is spoken aloud in front of a crowd. "What did you just say to me?" Chen Wei hissed, taking a half step forward, his massive frame towering over her like a shadow. "I said, you walked into me," Madame Li repeated, her tone unchanging. The silence in the market deepened until it felt almost physical, heavy enough to crush. Even one of Chen Wei's own students shifted uncomfortably behind him, a brief flash of nervousness crossing his young face. Everyone in the square understood the dangerous threshold they had just crossed. The old woman was completely refusing to show fear, and for a tyrant like Chen Wei, a lack of fear was the ultimate act of treason. For years, the neighborhood had bowed to his whims. People apologized to him when he broke their property. They stepped into the gutters to give him the dry sidewalk. Fear had always protected his massive ego from the reality of his own flaws. Now, a 70-year-old woman with a bag of spilled groceries had pulled back the curtain, exposing his childish arrogance for everyone to see. The reaction was immediate and brutal. Instead of addressing her words, Chen Wei lashed out. With an explosive, snapped motion, his heavy boot kicked Madame Li's 15-year-old metal thermos. The container launched into the air, flying across the damp pavement before smashing violently into the solid leg of a wooden fish stall. The sharp, metallic crash echoed through the narrow alleyways like a gunshot. Several people in the crowd gasped, their hands flying to their mouths. Madame Li didn't flinch. She slowly turned her head to look at the dented, broken thermos lying in the dirt, the hot ginger tea seeping out onto the wet asphalt. When she looked back up at Chen Wei, her eyes didn't contain anger. Instead, they were filled with a deep, crushing disappointment, the look of a mother watching a child commit a senseless act of malice. You should be thoroughly ashamed of yourself, she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper that somehow cut through the heavy air clearer than any shout. The words landed with the precision of a physical blow, striking Chen Wei right in his bloated pride. His eyes narrowed into slits, his chest heaving as his taped fists clenched tight. Nobody spoke to him that way. Nobody. He opened his mouth, his jaw tightening as he prepared to unleash a wave of violence that would reestablish his terrifying authority over the entire market. But before a single syllable could leave his throat, a voice cut through the humid air from the edge of the crowd. "That's enough!" The words weren't shouted. They weren't delivered with theatrical anger or dramatic flair. Yet, they possessed a resonant, unshakable authority that caused every head in the square to turn instantly. The entire market frozen in time, as if a master switch had been thrown. Standing near a wooden fish stall, dressed in simple, unadorned, dark training clothes, was a young man. There was nothing flashy about his appearance. No expensive jewelry, no trailing entourage, no aggressive posture. Yet, the moment he stepped forward, the balance of the entire street shifted. True confidence doesn't need to scream for attention. It commands the room simply by existing. As Bruce Lee stepped into the light of the neon signs, a wave of whispers washed through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. "It's him! Bruce Lee! What is he doing in this district?" A volatile mix of excitement and absolute terror rippled through the onlookers. They knew Bruce's reputation as a martial arts master, but they also knew the terrifying, unpredictable brutality of Chen Wei. They were looking at a powder keg, and the fuse had just been lit. Bruce, however, completely ignored the whispers. He ignored the heavy, violent glare that Chen Wei was throwing his way. He didn't even look at the two students who were shifting into aggressive stances. Instead, he walked right past the Tyrant, keeping his eyes locked on the old woman. With a smooth, unhurried grace, Bruce knelt down on the wet pavement. Carefully, almost reverently, he began to pick up the scattered bok choy and the dried shrimp, placing them gently back into the torn canvas bag. He walked over to the gutter, retrieved the dented metal thermos, and wiped the dirt from its surface with his palm before placing it on top of the groceries. He stood up, handing the bag back to Madame Lee with a respectful, gentle bow of his head. "Are you harmed, Auntie?" he asked softly. Madame Lee looked into the young man's eyes. For the first time since the collision, the tension left her face and a soft, knowing smile touched her lips. "No, young man, I am fine," she replied. "Good." Bruce nodded, his expression serene. Only then did he turn his body around to face Chen Wei. As the two men locked eyes, the entire market held its collective breath. Two completely opposing philosophies of life and strength had just arrived at a crossroads, and Kowloon would never be the same again. Section 3. The Ultimatum at the Market. The space between the two men felt like an invisible wall of pressurized air. On one side stood Chen Wei, a man whose physical presence was a loud, aggressive demand for submission. His muscles were rigid, his chest was pumped to its absolute limit, and his breath came in short, heavy snorts like a bull preparing to charge. On the other side stood Bruce Lee, entirely unbound by the tension of the room. He stood with his feet shoulder-width apart, his arms hanging loosely at his sides, his weight distributed so perfectly that he looked as though he could either vanish into thin air or strike like lightning at a moment's notice. The crowd looked back and forth between them, sensing an immediate, undeniable shift in the atmosphere. Chen Wei looked powerful, but Bruce looked entirely at peace. And in the world of true martial arts, peace is far more dangerous than anger. Chen Wei felt that shift, and it tasted like ash in his mouth. His jaw twitched as he took a long, deliberate step closer, trying to use his height to bury Bruce in his shadow. "Do you have a problem, friend?" Chen Wei asked, his voice dripping with a dangerous false politeness. Bruce looked at him, his face perfectly expressionless, before a mild, polite smile touched his lips. "No," Bruce replied smoothly. The simplicity of the answer caught Chen Wei off guard. The crowd, too, seemed to lean forward, confused by the lack of immediate hostility. "No?" Chen Wei sneered, his eyes narrowing. "Then why are you stepping into things that don't concern you?" "I have no problem," Bruce continued, his voice remaining low, steady, and perfectly clear in the dead quiet of the market. "I just don't particularly enjoy watching grown men use their strength to bully elderly women who cannot defend themselves." A collective, silent gasp seemed to ripple through the onlookers. To say such a thing aloud to Chen Wei's face wasn't just brave, it was considered suicidal in this district. Several vendors instinctively took another step backward, pulling their wooden stools with them, terrified that the inevitable explosion of violence would catch them in the crossfire. Chen Wei's face flushed a deep, angry crimson. He took another step forward, his wrapped knuckles clenching so tightly that the white cloth strained against his skin. His breath was hot, and he lowered his voice to a threatening hiss. I suggest you turn around, mind your own business, and walk out of this market while your legs still work. Bruce nodded thoughtfully, as if genuinely considering the advice. He looked down at the wet pavement for a brief second, then looked right back up, his eyes locking onto Chen Wei's with a sudden, piercing intensity that made the tyrant's breath catch in his throat. Normally, I would, Bruce said, his tone conversational, yet unyielding. I like a quiet evening walk as much as any man. But the moment someone starts harming innocent people on the street, it ceases to be a private matter. It becomes everyone's business. It becomes my business. The silence that followed was electric, heavy with the scent of rain, ozone, and impending violence. Chen Wei's pride was screaming. His entire identity, his years of building a reputation as an untouchable warlord in Kowloon, was being picked apart by a man in a simple, sleeveless shirt. He could feel the eyes of his two students burning into his back. He could feel the eyes of the shopkeepers, the people he had terrorized for years, watching him, waiting to see if his kingdom was built on stone or sand. You have no idea who I am, do you? Chen Wei growled, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and wounded pride. Look around you. Ask anyone in this market. I am Chen Wei. I have won tournaments across the territory. I can snap a man's ribs with a single kick. I can knock you unconscious before you even realize your hands are up. To emphasize his point, Chen Wei shifted his feet into a deep, aggressive karate stance, his lead hand snapping forward in a rigid, traditional guard. The movement was crisp, powerful, and technically flawless. Several onlookers nodded nervously. They had seen him back up those words with brutal reality in the past. Bruce didn't shift his stance. He didn't raise his hands. He simply looked at Chen Wei's rigid guard, then let out a soft, dangerous laugh. The laugh of a master who has already seen the end of a movie before the opening credits have finished rolling. One strike? Bruce asked, his voice laced with a subtle, cutting wit. One strike, Chen Wei confirmed, his confidence returning as he misread Bruce's calm demeanor for hesitation. And you won't be getting back up. Bruce nodded slowly, adjusting his weight slightly. Maybe you can, Bruce said quietly. The human body is capable of many things when it trains hard, but if you are truly as legendary as you claim to be, and if your skills are as absolute as your mouth says, why don't we find out the proper way? Chen Wei blinked, his rigid stance faltering for a split second. What? Bruce raised his right hand and pointed a single, calm finger over the rooftops toward the neon lights of Master Wong's traditional fighting hall, which sat just 3 blocks away at the edge of the district. Tomorrow night, Bruce announced, his voice lifting slightly so that every person trapped in the quiet market could hear the invitation. In the ring, in front of an open crowd, no narrow alleys where innocent people can get hurt, no grocery bags to trip over, just you, me, and the canvas. No excuses. A loud, frantic murmur erupted through the crowd instantly. The dam had broken. People were whispering furiously, their faces alive with a wild, terrified excitement. A public challenge had been issued to the undisputed king of intimidation, directly, flawlessly, and without a single shred of fear. Chen Wei stared at Bruce, utterly stunned by the audacity of the man standing before him. Then, as his brain processed the situation, a loud, booming laugh burst from his chest. It was a theatrical, mocking roar meant to project total confidence to the watching crowd. A match? Chen Wei shouted, looking back at his students, who both cracked sycophantic smiles. You want to step into an arena with me? In front of everyone? Foolish boy. You are handing me your life on a silver platter. He turned back to Bruce, his face twisting into a cruel, opportunistic grin. Fine, Chen Wei thundered, pointing his wrapped index finger directly at Bruce's chest. Tomorrow night at Master Wong's dojo. But a challenge like this needs stakes. When I defeat you, and I will destroy you, You will become my personal servant for 1 full year. You will clean my mats, you will carry my bags, and you will bow to me every time I enter the room. If you want to play the hero, you have to pay the price of admission." A collective gasp echoed through the market. The condition was deeply humiliating, designed to utterly ruin a man's dignity and break his spirit in a culture where face and honor meant everything. Even Bruce's quietest supporters in the crowd looked worried, their eyes darting to the young martial artist, wishing he would find a way to decline the trap. But Bruce didn't hesitate for even a fraction of a second. "I accept," Bruce said instantly, his face a mask of absolute certainty. The suddenness of the acceptance cut Chen Wei's laughter short. The tyrant's smile faltered, a strange, uncomfortable sensation creeping into his stomach. There was something unnatural about Bruce's level of confidence. It wasn't the loud, defensive bravado that Chen Wei was used to dealing with. It was the quiet, matter-of-fact certainty of a man who knew the gravity of the earth before he took a step. "But," Bruce added, his voice dropping an octave, holding the crowd in absolute suspense, "if I win, the terms are different." "Name them," Chen Wei spat, trying to hide his growing unease. "It won't matter anyway." Bruce pointed his hand toward the corner where Madame Li stood, her silver hair catching the glow of the flickering market lights. "If I win," Bruce said, his eyes burning into Chen Wei's soul, "you will drop to your knees and apologize to this woman, right here in the open street. And then you will turn around and apologize to every single shopkeeper, vendor, and laborer in this district whom you have spent years mistreating." The market went dead silent again. Chen Wei's mouth slightly opened in utter disbelief. Of all the things a challenger could ask for, money, the ownership of a dojo, a public championship, a cash prize, this man wanted an apology. He wanted justice for the nameless, faceless working class of Kowloon. For a brief, fleeting second, Chen Wei hesitated. It was a micro-expression, a slight twitch of his eyelid and a shifting of his weight, but Bruce caught it instantly. And so did the crowd. For the first time in 10 years, the predator had felt the cold hand of doubt touch his shoulder. Realizing his hesitation was showing, Chen Wei quickly recovered, his jaw hardening into concrete. "Fine," Chen Wei snarled, turning on his heel. "Tomorrow night, enjoy your final hours of freedom, hero." With a sweep of his arm, Chen Wei and his two students pushed their way through the crowd, vanishing into the damp, dark labyrinth of the Kowloon alleys.